Welcome to Ask a Doc podcast. Today I am going to be talking about colorectal cancer screening. And in this podcast, you can actually download the Medici app. That's Medici. And it's in your Google Play Store or your iPhone Play Store. You can download the app and send questions to me and ask your own doctor about what really you are concerned about and what you're worried about. And so this podcast was inspired by the coronavirus pandemic, where there's a lot of information out there and who to trust. Who should we go to for information? And I am a certified family medicine physician who really cares about all these things. And so, but we'll dive in and we'll talk about colorectal cancer screening. So this was inspired by Chadwick Boseman, who died at the age of 43. He was one of the actors in the 2018 Marvel Studios mega hit called Black Panther, and he died from colon cancer. And there has been an interest now since such a young person has passed. And I'm about 40 years old. Well, I turned 40 2 weeks ago, so thank you for wishing me a happy birthday. And when I was, I guess, young, 40 didn't sound young at all, but now it does. So it hits home. It really does to see a 43-year-old healthy person die from colorectal cancer. And so who's at risk? Should we get checked? What are the risk factors? What can I do to lower my chances of getting colorectal cancer? And this might turn into a two segments type of talk, because there's so much to talk about in this regard. And so just to review, so you within your digestive system, you have your mouth and the esophagus and the stomach, and then the food goes into your small intestine, and then it finally goes to the last part, which is the colon. And so the colon is responsible for absorbing the remaining amount of water, and it's mainly a water absorbing type of organ to concentrate your poop, and then you poop out. And so in my opinion, and I'll give you we'll go through a lot of the testing and screening and all that and the risk factors, etc. But in my opinion, I think that a lot of these cancers, particularly with colorectal cancer, has a lot to do with the food that we eat. And there are some exceptions, right? There are some people who have the genetic predisposition to having colorectal cancer, but a lot of the food that we consume here in the United States is really bad for us. And there are certain foods that are specifically bad, and there's some foods that are actually good for us. Not everything causes cancer. In fact, there are some foods that reduces our rate of cancer. And so we'll jump back into that topic. But for now, what I want to go through are how we can screen against colorectal cancer, who needs to get checked, how can we check, and go from there. So the people that are at risk are going to be those with a family history of colorectal cancer, and this is a big one. And if you have a first-degree relative, most importantly, meaning that brother, sister, mother, or father, grandparents and cousins and seconds or whatever, so that level of family generally does not affect the individual as much and is not taken into consideration. But if you have a mother, father, brother, sister who has or had colorectal cancer, then that puts you at risk. So much so that you'd actually do some screening early on, and so typically, for most people, everybody needs some type of screening at the age of 50. Okay, so that's kind of the age to consider screening. But you bump that down quite a bit if there's a family history. So if somebody has but you have to take into account the individual member of the family who had colorectal cancer. So say, like, for example, like your dad. So if your dad has or had colorectal cancer and he was diagnosed at the age of 43, then what you do is you subtract 10 years from that. So you would do 33 is when you would actually start getting screened, which sounds crazy because normally it's 50 years of age. And so Now that has its limitations, right? So like if say your dad is like 70 and he gets diagnosed with colorectal cancer, well, you just go ahead and do like 50 years of age, right? So whichever one comes sooner, right? So you'd minus 10 from the age of the family member who had colorectal cancer. And if that's less than 50, then you go with that number. But if it's not, then you stick with the age of 50, right? So, a lot of people will say, I feel fine. I don't need colorectal cancer screening, right? So, and in part because I think most people kind of have a heads up as to how we do the screening. I think that plays into a part, and I'll talk about that here in a second. And I tell people all the time that like you cannot rely on how you feel to determine if you need to be screened, because then in no longer screening, it's now diagnosing. If there's symptoms, then it's a diagnosing process. And typically with colorectal cancer, if there are symptoms and it's due to colorectal cancer, then it's kind of like late in the game. There's a big fear out there that like, well, I don't want to look for cancer because if we don't look for it, then I can live in this pretend world that I'll be fine and I'll never need to do anything about it, right? So like there's this fear factor of finding something, because we find something if we get screened, and if we find cancer early, then that's it, we're done. And there's a lot of sad examples of seeing family members who have gone through the process of getting treatment for chemotherapy or surgery, and they said, I don't want any of that. Well, the part of the problem was that, you know, that family member might have, I'm not blanket statements at all, but there are people who are like, well, the reason why those harsh treatments were initiated is because it was such advanced cancer, and they waited so long to actually and they waited till they actually felt something, right? So they had like constipation, they had bleeding in their stool, which are not very specific signs. That could be explained by other reasons, but they waited until they felt something. Then they were diagnosed with cancer. And that's a very bad position to be in, because a lot of times the only thing that's left in terms of treatment is going to be really harsh treatments. But if we find cancer early, then we can actually use methods that are, surgery is still rough, but if you find cancer early enough, you don't even have to do the chemotherapy. You get your surgery and be done with it. And even better, even the most ideal situation is that they see like polyps called precancer. And then they remove that from a non-invasive procedure, and you don't have to do surgery, and it's done with. And you actually bypassed having to go through all of the rough things with colorectal cancer. So I recommend highly, highly for those who are at risk to get screened. Again, let me repeat it. It's going to be typically at the age of 50. Don't wait until you feel something or something's wrong. Age of 50 is when all people, regardless of whether they are at risk or not, you can be in the tip top of your shape, of you be the healthiest person, vegan, exercising. You still need your colonoscopy at the age of 50, both men and women. If there's a family history, specifically first-degree relatives, so mother, father, brother, sister, if there was some, then you minus 10 years of age of that individual, right? So if it's a mother or a sibling who had cancer, you minus 10 years. The example I gave is that is going to be like if you were diagnosed if your brother was diagnosed at the 43, then you're going to need it at 33, etc. So that's about. Now, how do we get screened? So what are the methods of screening? So the most notorious one is the colonoscopy. Dun dun dun. All right, yes, I understand people don't like getting colonoscopies, right? So, but nobody likes getting chemotherapy either, and so it's a trade-off, right? So like, do the thing that is, it's minimally invasive compared to the things that actually causes a decrease of quality of life. And so, that's not the only way, right? So let me explain what colonoscopies are first before going on. So there are some people who may not know what a colonoscopy is. And so the process is this, right? So with colonoscopies, you got to look at it you got to look at the cancer, but from inside the colon. And so they have this long fiber optic scope. They sedate you, right? So they don't put you into a deep coma, right? So for example, like for people who get surgery, you put them in a deep coma temporarily, and they need to be ventilated. It's a much more like arduous thing for like surgery. So they sedate you. That's a different level of treatment. So they don't put you under, like deep under, but they give you enough medicine to where it calms you down. So they give you a deep sedation, not to the point where you stop breathing, right? So they give you medicines, they give you anxiety medicines, they give you medicines to really like relax. And a lot of times, there's a kind of a lack of memory. It's like, well, I don't know what happened there. And so they insert the fiber optic scope through the anus and goes through the rectum and goes the entire colon. And they fill it with air so that there's space to work in. And they have these little tiny tools at the ends that they can take biopsies from. And so the typically what people say is that the actual colonoscopy itself is not that bad, and so people will say that the preparation prior is what really is the tough part, right? So they give you this gallon of liquid with lots of Miralax in there, and you drink the whole thing, and then you're basically having a bunch of diarrhea throughout the whole day and throughout the whole night. And they do that so that they clean all the stool out so that it gives them a good clean view of what's going on. And so that's colonoscopies. If it's negative, then it's every 10 years. Okay. If they do find a polyp, then depending on the kind, but on average, it's going to be every like 5 years in that case. So now if, for those who are at high risk, right? So those with the genetic disorders like Lynch syndrome, or those who have inflammatory bowel disease, or they have familial polyposis syndrome, then that's a different story, right? So those people, there's not really an alternative option. They need to have a colonoscopy. But for your kind of like standard risk person, then there are some alternatives out there, and we'll go through those. So there's the sigmoidoscopy, which still has the fiber optic scope, but it's like it checks half the colon. The difference is that for that one, it's a very, very, very light sedation, and you can actually go to work that same day. Whereas a colonoscopy, you kind of have to take the day off to do your colonoscopy. And so for like the busy person, which, I mean, I don't know, in my mind of like, if you're going to have to go through a sigmoidoscopy, just get the colonoscopy. But supposedly sigmoidoscopies are fine. So it's like a half colonoscopy with less sedation. The other one, I call them the poop tests. And my running joke is that we take crap from everybody. And so us in porta potties, hey, I don't mind it. I take your crap. I take it all the time. So we want your crap, right? So if you need the screening, there are these stool tests. I'm like, what are you talking about? There are these stool tests. So there's two different kinds. There's called the cold blood stool test, which is a yearly test where you just take a little device. It's a very clean process, but yes, you do have to look at it. You have to look at your poop, and the sight of poop. Sorry, so I'm a dad, and I've got 3 small kids, and there's just been I've changed a lot of diapers throughout my life, and I'm over it. I'm like, the sight of poop doesn't gross me out. Okay, so and a lot of y'all can relate, right? So I can do fine with looking at poop. It's just I just don't touch it. And so you have a little device, and you have to look at it on the toilet paper, and you kind of grab it with this little plastic, not a spoon, but like this little tip, and then you put the cap on, and then you just take it to the lab, and it looks at blood. The problem with looking at microscopic amounts of blood, because colorectal cancer has it sheds blood, and so there's microscopic amounts of blood that's being shed from the cancer, or if through polyps. And you can detect colorectal cancer sooner doing it that way. The bad part is that it can't tell the difference between that and, like, for example, hemorrhoids. So if you get hemorrhoids, then it'll turn positive. And so that's the problem, right? So you can have something very benign like that. And so there's another specific test that it's called the Cologuard. It's a little more specific, I think, than the blood stool test, because it's looking at the actual DNA, like the cancer types of DNA, because it will shed the cancer, if it's there in early stages, and also polyps, will start shedding these DNA segments that are different than healthy DNA, and you can detect that through the Cologuard. And it's interesting because it's a company that sends you the box. It has to be ordered by a physician, but it sends you the box by mail. And you should look it up if you're interested, the Cologuard. And you basically sit on a upside down hat kind of thing. When you go to the bathroom, you poop, and then you kind of have to like take a scoop of it, and then you basically send your whole turd in a box. You send it by mail. And for those who don't want to go to the doctor's office to get it done, you can just call your doctor and say, hey, can I get the Cologuard test? The problem with it is that some insurance covers it and some doesn't. And so you have to call your insurance company. The rest of the ones I talked about prior, right? The Cologuard, the Colt stool test, and also the sigmoidoscopy and colonoscopies. So those are covered by insurance. You would think that they would cover this, but I mean, insurance companies, who knows what they're thinking. And so, but anyway, so the benefit of this is that's every 3 years as opposed to the occult blood test, which is every year. So those are the different ways to do it. And so let's talk about the population that is the actor that I described, was it Chadwick Boseman. So one of the risk factors for developing colorectal cancer is being of African American descent. And so black men and women are at higher risk of developing colorectal cancer. And we really don't know why, and whether it's genetic or whether it's the diet, or whether it's both. We don't know. And it's unfortunate that the amount of research, which I mean I feel kind of upset about, there should be an abundant amount of research, but there's less. And as a consequence, there's these decision makings that are based off of less than ideal research. And so because of that, you have discrepancies, you have different opinions. So the society, the Gastroenterology Society of America, so they actually recommend that African Americans get screened at the age of 45, whereas the United States Protective Service Task Force doesn't make comments about that. And so, in my opinion, because the cancer rates are higher, I think it's actually worth it for black men and women to get their colonoscopies at the age of 45. And so, but sadly, you don't hear much about that. And I don't know all about why that is. So that's the population to look into. Okay, now let's talk about the stuff I really enjoy talking about. Let's talk about diets. What are the foods that are very important to consider? And then we'll talk about, actually, before I talk about that, let's talk about some of the symptoms, okay? So, because that kind of freaks people out. I hate talking about symptoms that are potentially like cancer causing, because like every symptom is like cancer. I hate it. And so, every little thing can be cancer, but you don't have to worry about it if you get screened. So if you're like 50, or if you're one of the individuals that I talked about that needs a screening test, then you can have some random symptom and you can think, oh, I'm fine. I got my test done, and it's just hemorrhoids or whatever, right? So you don't have to worry about, well, that's not a symptom of it, but so I want to say that first before I go into it. All right, so here we go. Here are the symptoms of colorectal cancer. Oh, I hope I don't regret talking about this. Okay, so like stomach pain. So stomach pain can be a symptom, but stomach pain can be a bunch of different things, right? You can have like indigestion, you can have acid reflux, you can have stomach ulcers. I mean, you can have, or it could be colorectal cancer. I mean, that's awful. A change in bowel movements, right? So like if your bowel movements kind of are different, right? The number of times you're pooping, the texture, the size, if poop comes out in like a little pencil format, right? So it's like really thin and long, right? So that could be a change, or that could be a symptom of rectal cancer. So blood in the bowel movements, right? So that's one that I've seen pretty consistently, is for those who, especially, I remember this one guy, he was like late 40s, and he had blood in his stool. and he didn't have a family history. And I was like, man, he's like almost 50, a couple more years, and he's got like blood in his stool, and he doesn't really eat healthy, so it could be constipation. But people who don't eat healthy get colon cancer. So I mean, I said, hey, try this Miralax and give it a try. And he was having I figured that it was just going to be hemorrhoids, right? So I figured it was like, it's probably just hemorrhoids, and just try to eat healthy and increase your fiber intake, and then see if it doesn't get better. And it did. It got better, and his blood in his stools got better, and it went away. But I was just still feeling like, you probably need a colonoscopy. And lo and behold, he had colorectal cancer. And so blood in your stools, it's awful because it could be hemorrhoids, or it could be cancer. It could be colorectal cancer. So for him, because he was kind of on the edge of where he would have needed one, I went ahead and just said that, could go ahead and get it done. Okay, so feeling weak or tired, so you're more prone to anemia, and anemia could be a symptom of colorectal cancer because of the slow bleeding that occurs. So anyway, let's talk about the risk factors. Okay, so risk factors includes obesity. Obesity is a kind of a condition that affects a lot of cancers, and it's a big reason to consider weight loss, which I've talked about before. So diabetes is a risk factor. So let me say that these are risk factors that do not necessarily justify getting a colonoscopy sooner. These are risk factors that we can change to help you reduce your risk, right? So I don't do colonoscopies in every single person that's obese or every person that's diabetic. But if they meet the criteria, which is usually age-based or family history-based, if they're 50 or if they have the family history, then yes, I think we should go ahead and get a colonoscopy. So I don't think every diabetic person needs a colonoscopy. Okay, so it's people who smoke, right? So smoking causes all sorts of cancers. Here's something that's I think a lot of you will be interested in. Okay, so processed red meat. So processed red meats are, so what kind of meats are those? So there's going to be like the sausage and the bacons for sure. But there's a bunch of other things that like pork or ham rather. Ham is an example of a processed meat. And why is it that these things actually have cancer causing properties to it? We really don't know why it is. What is it about the processing part of it that causes it? Like what is it about the manufacturing of these red meats that develop the fact that it can potentially cause increased risk of cancer? We do not know. So, but sausage and bacon are ones that are bad. So ham, beef jerky. So sorry if you like beef jerky, corned beef, and another smoked or salted, fermented, or cured meats. And so they're actually even considered a group 1 carcinogen, and putting them in the same category of cancers as asbestos, cigarettes, which is interesting, to know that these types of meats can actually provoke the same amount of cancer as like one cigarette. The thing is that you can find people who smoke 30 cigarettes a day because it's addictive. It's kind of hard to find someone who eats like 30 pieces of sausage or bacon or beef jerky. I mean, you'd have to really overdo it. So that's why you're not seeing like a huge movement or advertisements against it. Okay, so not only that, but high temperature cooking of these meats makes it even worse. Just by itself, it's bad, and then if you overcook it, and so the implication is that it changes these certain types of chemicals within the meat into what's called polyaromatic hydrocarbons. And so if you overcook the meat, which is what like we do with barbecuing and pan frying, right? So like, how do you cook a sausage normally? We barbecue it, or put it in the pan frying. I mean, that is actually creating cancer. And so what I recommend is that you would consider doing lean meats. So lean meats are going to be less of a risk. So if you want to do a barbecue, you're like, man, Jorge, you're just not, are you from Texas? I'm like, well, yeah, I am, but I don't feel like it these days. But so I'm kind of against, I mean, that's a strong word, but I'm not a big fan of barbecuing. I'll say it that much, right? So, but dude, that's like football and barbecue. That's like the joy of being a Texan, right? And so, and I'm like, well, sorry, I'm not a big fan of developing cancer. So, but what are the lean meats? The lean meats that are less risky. So like some types of pork, so like the loin and chopped, those types of porks, but try to cut off the fat. So lamb, veal, apparently kangaroo is better. Within beef, you can do the loin and round. So an example would be like sirloin, and then the 95% lean ground tenderloin. So these are types of lean meats. They're going to be better for you. I mean, try to like do oven cooking. I'm not a big fan of pan frying red meats or barbecuing red meats, but actually like, cooking it. I guess you can boil it. I've never tried it, but like, using an oven to cook these meats, lean, especially if it's lean. I reduce my red meat consumption quite a bit, and so, I mean, I try to consume so I eat fish and chicken. There isn't that concern like with, like barbecued chicken and barbecued fish. That's not an issue, but it's just with barbecued red meats. Okay. So, and at some point I'll probably focus more about like how to cook the meats, because you don't want to overcook it, but you don't want to undercook red meats either. And so I highly, highly recommend getting like a temperature food thermometer, because if you undercook red meats, then there's a risk of E. coli infection. If you overcook it, then, so there's like this like little window of where you cook meats and it's like perfect. Okay. So I definitely recommend that, you look it up, go to the USDA, and they have a whole segment on cookie temperatures, and get yourself an actual thermometer, like a food thermometer that can measure the temperature of what you're cooking. And that's just good practice overall. So alcohol is something that can increase your risk of colorectal cancer. And it's kind of, I have mixed thoughts about alcohol. I mean, there's some research to show that it actually can reduce your rate of cardiovascular disease, but then also if you consume alcohol, it can increase your rate of colorectal cancer. So the way that I go about it is that if somebody has a family history of cardiovascular disease, then sure, you can have specifically some red wine, like 1 to 2 glasses per day. But if there's a family history of colorectal cancer, or if you're worried about cancer, then there is an association, and that maybe you need to cut back or cut out your alcohol consumption. So what are the things that are protective? So I talked about all the bad things. So what are some of the good things you can do? Well, one is going to be physical activity. It's interesting that physical exercise can actually reduce your rates of certain cancers, specifically with colorectal cancer. And then also increasing the amount of vegetables and fruits that are in your diet. And so that is fantastic. It is really important. I always recommend about 4 cups of vegetables every day. And it's amazing. So fruits you don't really need that much fruit. I mean, just one large apple is sufficient fruits to satisfy the reduction of colorectal cancer. So, I mean, I meet people all the time that are like, oh, I eat my fruits and vegetables. I eat like, I don't know, 12 apples or 12 oranges a day. I'm like, okay, so you only need 1. So how about the vegetables? Well, I eat vegetables sometimes. So like, that's the problem. Whereas with vegetables, you need about 4 cups per day. So sure, eat your vegetables, but you only need 1 apple or orange or whatever it is. But you need a whole lot more vegetables. Okay, so another thing to consider is the fiber in your diet. So increasing the amount of fiber you consume can actually reduce your rate of colorectal cancer. There's different kinds. There's the whole grain, soluble, insoluble. And so the one, so it's interesting that the synthetic fibers actually don't seem to really reduce your rate of colorectal cancer. So like psyllium, pectin, and dextrin, those seem to not really help so much, but more of the natural kinds, right? So And the best example I love is going to be oatmeal. Oatmeal is wonderful because not only does it reduce your rate of getting colorectal cancer, but it also reduces your rate of getting cardiovascular disease. And so, but so different kinds of fiber is going to be fantastic. So barley, rye, wheat. When you do like grains, okay, so be sure to like get the whole grain, not the like, processed stuff, right? So like sure, I mean, there's like breads potentially could reduce your rate of colorectal cancer, but like not the white stuff, because that white bread is processed and it's removing the part of the grain that's actually healthy. It's selecting only for like the starchy parts, and it takes away the seed coats, whereas really the seed coat of the grain is what really helps reduce your rate of colorectal cancer. And so the things that have a good amount of fiber, so apples, some bananas, oranges are fantastic. So green beans are actually high in fiber. Peas are wonderful. So cucumbers, lettuces, tomatoes, spinach, carrots are a good source, as well as the legumes, so like the black beans and the kidney beans, etc. And the lentils actually have quite a bit of fiber, and so it has about 15.6 grams of fiber per serving. And so if I had to pick two that are the highest, are going to be lentils that are boiled, as well as prunes. And so the breads that I recommend, so like bran muffins actually have 5.2 grams per serving of fiber. So I don't know how. So, but if they put a bunch of sugar in there, you got to be careful about that. But cooked oatmeal has about 4 grams per serving, and so that leads the list. In terms of nuts, the nuts that have lots of fiber in it are going to be almonds, are going to be high in the list. Peanuts, they have some fiber as well, not as much as almonds. So let me do my 3 top favorites in terms of high fiber, or maybe 4. Just stick it to 3. So the 3 is going to be oatmeal, so cooked oatmeal. It doesn't matter if you put water or almond milk, which is my preference, or cow milk, right? So I like the almond milk because of the omega-3 fatty acids, and so it's lower in calories as well. So oatmeal cooked in almond milk, and then also almonds, right? So almonds, and then finally prunes. So those are my top 3 as far as like the highest amount of fiber. On top of that, try to consume about 4 cups of vegetables per day. And so magnesium, just to keep going with the list of foods, magnesium is actually helpful for prevention of colorectal cancer. The thing about magnesium is that it's really in a multitude of foods. I mean, really just there's too many to mention, but I'll just mention that like almonds has a high level of magnesium. Spinach, cashews has a lot of magnesium in it. And so those are just to name a few. And so, but if you notice that the ones that have high fiber tend to have high levels of magnesium as well. So fish is very helpful as well. And it's not only does, it's kind of like oatmeal in that it reduces your rate of cardiovascular disease and also colorectal cancer. But consumption of fish, mainly the oily fish, can be helpful. And so salmon is the one that seems to get a lot of attention. But there's a bunch of others that are oily fishes, anchovies, Atlantic herring is more of a sustainable fish, salmon, Atlantic salmon. So if you're concerned about environment and like sustainability, the farm raised salmon actually can cause a little more effects on the environment than like wild salmon, but either way. So bluefin tuna, and so you don't want to get the types of fish that potentially has mercury in it. So the ones that have mercury are going to be tilefish, swordfish, and king mackerel are the main ones. And so these are like the predator fish that to stay away from. Even though they have the omega-3 fatty acids in it, I'm not a big fan of them. But just stick to Atlantic herring, canned anchovies, and then the Atlantic salmon. The bluefin tuna is not bad. Atlantic mackerel is not bad. Bluefish, rainbow trouts, that's not bad at all. Atlantic canned sardines. There's also striped bass. But then albacore is pretty good. Carp. But if you want to get in terms of the highest concentration of the omega-3s is going to end up being salmon and also the Atlantic herring. And so coffee might be beneficial. There's been an association, a reduction of colorectal cancer with coffee. And you got to be careful with coffee because it can really mess up your sleep, and that's the only problem. So I gave up my coffee consumption, not because I thought it was bad. In fact, I think coffee can be potentially good, but I just had some sleep issues. We think that not within colorectal cancer, but some other studies to show that decaf might be just as good as the regular caffeine. So if you want to have that caffeine benefit without getting the actual caffeine, how did I say it? So if you want the benefit of coffee without the caffeine, just get decaffeinated. Aspirin potentially can reduce your rate of getting colorectal cancer. The evidence is much more robust in those with Lynch syndrome. So if the individual has Lynch syndrome, you might want to talk to your doctor about reducing or about starting some type of aspirin, because the quantity and the milligrams matters. So you need to talk to them about it. And so a baby aspirin is associated with lower risk of getting colorectal cancer. But you got to be careful if you have a history of like stomach ulcers, then or easy bleeding, or if you take another blood thinner for another reason. You really need to ask your personal doctor as to whether you should be on that or not. And so those are all the things that I have to talk about. And so colorectal cancer is a big deal. It's like I want to say it's like the number 2 cause of cancer in the United States. So number 1 is going to be lung cancer, and then 2 and 3 are going to be breast cancer, and then colorectal cancer. So it's right up there with breast cancer. It affects a lot of people. There's ways to prevent it. It's basically having a healthy lifestyle, eating vegetables, and also exercising, not smoking. And then getting screens, getting the testing when you're supposed to. The time and the age matters, and the family history matters. And so hopefully you like these podcasts. If you have a topic that you really want me to talk about, then send it my way, and I can go over it. And if there is just something random, then sure, I can do my best to answer that as well. Well, you guys have a fantastic day, and hope you live a happy and healthy life. You guys, see you later. Bye-bye.